The candles flickered quietly, and 15 mourners watched as Johnny Depp stood at River Phoenix's memorial with Keanu Reeves when a close friend told them that movie stars don't understand real grief during an intimate gathering that would challenge their understanding of authentic loss versus public mourning. West Hollywood Private Residence, November 1993. The memorial service occupies a converted living space where genuine grief meets Hollywood sympathy, where authentic loss processing determines emotional credibility more than entertainment industry mourning or celebrity condolences that reduce personal tragedy to public statements designed for media consumption, rather than understanding bereavement as private spiritual journey requiring sustained emotional work. The gathering embodies intimate mourning culture. Personal photographs scattered across tables that reflect years of genuine friendship, handwritten letters and artwork that demonstrate authentic creative connection, memorial candles that create contemplative atmosphere for private reflection rather than public demonstration serving career networking or industry solidarity. Johnny Depp, 30 years old, adjusts his black suit while processing loss complexity that challenges conventional grief expression through personal frameworks extending beyond public mourning toward authentic bereavement that memorial services demand from attendees whose credibility must span emotional honesty rather than relying solely on professional sympathy. Beside him, Keanu Reeves reviews personal memories with characteristic introspection, his own profound connection to River requiring emotional authenticity that contemporary memorial gatherings demand, rather than entertainment industry mourning protocols that prioritize appropriate appearance over genuine feeling and personal loss processing. This gathering honors River's authentic creative spirit, Johnny observes quietly, noting the intimate atmosphere that balances personal remembrance with collective grieving extending beyond public memorial toward private emotional work that few entertainment industry events address through genuine community support. Different kind of emotional challenge than public mourning, Keanu agrees, recognizing the parallel between authentic grief expression and entertainment industry bereavement that prioritizes appropriate response over honest feeling, requiring sustained emotional commitment to loss processing and memorial participation that most celebrity events never provide. Their attendance begins with appreciation for intimate mourning culture that operates independently of entertainment industry publicity, seeking authentic remembrance that serves personal healing rather than maintaining established public image through appropriate grief demonstration that generates media coverage without addressing genuine bereavement needs. The memorial attracts River's closest relationships whose grief commitment reflects deep personal connection rather than professional association based on industry networking, mourners who understand loss requirements while recognizing emotional demands that serve both personal healing and community support requiring sustained bereavement work. The gathering includes family members whose grief encompasses lifelong relationship complexity, artistic collaborators whose loss reflects creative partnership interruption, personal friends whose mourning represents genuine life disruption rather than professional inconvenience that celebrity deaths might create for industry colleagues. Most entertainment industry people who attend memorial services want appropriate grief expression for public image rather than processing actual personal loss, explains Dr. Sarah Martinez, a grief counselor whose own bereavement experience encompasses family and professional grief counseling. They approach mourning through public appropriateness rather than recognizing emotional requirements that define authentic grief and personal healing. As gathering progresses, both actors demonstrate respectful engagement with memorial protocols and grief complexity, recognizing emotional authenticity that extends beyond their current knowledge while avoiding public approaches that treat mourning like appropriate response, rather than understanding bereavement as personal spiritual work requiring sustained emotional commitment. The residence's reputation attracts legitimate grief community members whose mourning authority creates evaluation standards for distinguishing genuine bereavement from entertainment industry appropriation that treats memorial services like networking opportunities rather than understanding grief as a cultural practice requiring sustained emotional participation.
From his position near Rivers' personal artwork, David Phoenix Chen, Rivers' longtime personal friend and artistic collaborator, observes both actors' mourning engagement with growing understanding of grief requirements that distinguish authentic bereavement from public mourning toward personal healing requiring participants whose emotional honesty spans individual loss processing.
Chen represents authentic grief authority, personal relationship expertise earned through years of genuine friendship and creative collaboration, emotional knowledge developed through sustained personal connection, spiritual integrity that prioritizes authentic healing over public accommodation that might compromise memorial vision for entertainment appeal or industry networking. He watches both actors' memorial participation with practiced assessment earned through distinguishing genuine grief engagement from professional mourning that entertainment industry protocols might create through emphasis on appropriate response over authentic feeling, recognizing emotional patterns that reveal preparation approaches. The bereavement framework requires understanding loss as personal spiritual work rather than public demonstration, mourning as emotional journey rather than appropriate response, memorial as healing community rather than networking event, grief as authentic feeling rather than professional obligation, concepts that challenge entertainment industry mourning approaches. As service deepens, both actors demonstrate growing appreciation for grief concepts while revealing mourning approaches that emphasize appropriate response and public image rather than engaging emotional frameworks that inform bereavement through personal healing requiring sustained spiritual commitment beyond professional sympathy. Their participation focuses on appropriate memorial behavior rather than processing personal loss through authentic feeling, approaching grief gathering through public propriety rather than emotional honesty that requires understanding mourning as personal journey rather than appropriate demonstration for community observation. 6 seconds pass as Chen evaluates their grief engagement and apparent limitation in accessing authentic bereavement that memorial services require from participants whose emotional honesty must support community healing rather than reducing mourning to appropriate response serving public image management. Movie stars don't understand real grief, Chen declares, with devastating precision, earned through distinguishing authentic bereavement from entertainment industry mourning that treats memorial services like appropriate public response, rather than recognizing grief work requiring sustained emotional commitment and spiritual vulnerability beyond professional sympathy. His assessment exposes fundamental requirement that prioritizes emotional authenticity over public appropriateness for bereavement that serves as personal healing rather than entertainment demonstration, recognizing contemporary grief expectations for spiritual credibility that requires participants whose emotional understanding supports community healing rather than individual image management. The declaration carries particular significance because Rivers Memorial represents authentic grief breakthrough that demands participants whose emotional engagement supports community healing rather than reducing bereavement complexity to appropriate response that might compromise healing vision for public accommodation or entertainment industry networking. Memorial attendees respond with understanding of spiritual factors that influence grief development beyond public considerations, recognizing authentic healing that depends on participant capability, whose emotional authenticity supports community recovery that appropriate response might not provide without corresponding spiritual engagement and personal loss processing. Johnny's face shows recognition of evaluation criteria that prioritizes emotional authenticity over public appropriateness, his entertainment industry mourning conflicting with grief requirements that memorial services demand from participants rather than accepting appropriate response as substitute for spiritual understanding and emotional commitment. But before Johnny can respond with arguments about his genuine grief or defend his mourning sincerity through personal connection and continued remembrance, he demonstrates understanding that acknowledges emotional requirements while respecting spiritual expertise, requiring authentic feeling rather than appropriate performance. "David," Johnny says respectfully, his voice carrying genuine recognition of grief authority rather than defensive public pride,
You're absolutely right about our grief understanding. We need to engage personal loss processing and authentic feeling at fundamental levels rather than approaching mourning through appropriate response that might not serve community healing. Chen appreciates Johnny's immediate understanding of emotional demands and willingness to accept spiritual requirements rather than defending appropriate mourning that might not serve grief concepts, despite genuine personal connection and continued remembrance through established memorial approaches.
Johnny continues with growing recognition of spiritual authority. When you say movie stars don't understand real grief, you're addressing our need for authentic feeling engagement rather than treating memorial like appropriate public response that prioritizes image management over community healing and personal loss processing. The acknowledgement demonstrates Johnny's understanding that grief success requires serving emotional authenticity rather than adapting mourning concepts to accommodate public interpretation, recognizing spiritual reality that influences healing decisions beyond personal image preference or entertainment industry mourning patterns. Both actors recognize the profound truth in Chen's words, their revised approach enabling genuine participation in memorial healing rather than appropriate public mourning, demonstrating collaborative grief that balances spiritual requirements with personal capability while maintaining authentic bereavement commitment. Over following hours, Chen shares perspective about authentic grief processing, spiritual healing, and emotional development that distinguishes genuine mourning from public response, helping both actors understand bereavement as personal journey rather than appropriate demonstrations serving public image without requiring corresponding spiritual participation. Years later, both actors speak about Rivers' memorial as educational about grief requirements, emotional authenticity, and spiritual development that serves genuine healing rather than accommodating public approaches, despite sincere personal connection and continued remembrance beyond memorial attendance. Chen occasionally references that gathering as example of how grief education requires authentic spiritual engagement when public figures choose emotional learning over appropriate assumption and healing respect over mourning that treats grief community like public demonstration rather than understanding bereavement as spiritual discipline requiring sustained emotional commitment. 6 seconds at Rivers Memorial in 1993. One moment when public mourning met authentic grief before spiritual understanding enabled genuine emotional participation. One choice that served healing vision rather than public accommodation and proved that authentic bereavement requires emotional honesty and spiritual commitment rather than appropriate response alone. The memorial that showed genuine grief demands spiritual authenticity and emotional vulnerability that can't be substituted through appropriate mourning or public response alone, because authentic bereavement community depends on emotional honesty and spiritual consciousness that entertainment industry success doesn't automatically provide, despite personal connection and sincere remembrance designed for appropriate expression rather than spiritual healing and community recovery.